Hello, everybody. My name is Susan Hawthorne, and I'm one of the two publishers at Spinifex Press. The other one is Renata Klein. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd just like to begin by acknowledging country, which for those of you who are overseas is something that we do in Australia, recognising the Indigenous owners of the land. So we respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Eora and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So it's really and truly a great pleasure to be here today to have the launch of Caitlin Roper's Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, The Case for Resistance. So it's thrilling. It's a fabulous book. It's a tough book to read, but it is so important, and it is really not talked about very widely. And this will, I hope, get lots of notice because it's talking about something that is generally ignored. So I'm going to begin by introducing our launcher, who is Vivian Morrigan. She's had a long-standing interest in ethical science and technology from a feminist perspective. She met Caitlin when they joined the FATES, that is the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics, which was initiated by Professor Kathleen Richardson in the UK. The FATES began as a feminist reading group that quickly evolved into a writing project, which has produced a jointly authored book edited by Kathleen Richardson and Charlotte Odland, which will be out later this year. It's called Man-Made Women, The Sexual Politics of Sex Dolls and Sex Robots. And it's in the Social and Cultural Studies of Robots and AI series that Palgrave Macmillan is doing. So as Vivian said, Caitlin has brilliantly managed to produce her own book before that one comes. So good on you, Caitlin, for getting there first. And Vivian, thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you to Spinifex Press for inviting me to help launch this groundbreaking book, Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, The Case for Resistance, written by Caitlin Roper. The book carries endorsements by well-known critics of misogyny, including radical feminist Sheila Jeffreys, who states that it is, quote, a crucial book for the campaign to stop the sex doll and robot industry. Its relatively small number of 175 pages supports the reader to process the challenging nature of its contents, packed with detail to furnish the activist with data-based evidence valuable for constructing argument and fueling action. Caitlin calls for us to resist so-called sex dolls and robots that are pornographic replicas of women and girls produced for men's sexual use and the literal three-dimensional objectification of women. Caitlin points out that more than 95% of sales are to men, and that these objects are marketed as companions. Sounds very nice, doesn't it? A horrible twisting of the meaning of a sexual relationship through offering men their ideal woman and perfect girlfriend that can be stored away after use and or abuse. Advocates claim the development of sex dolls and robots should be actively encouraged and will have many benefits. In contrast, Caitlin shows how these technologies are certainly not beneficial to women. For some, These misogynist technologies may seem marginalised issue that belongs in other people's bedroom. This book alerts us to their very real dangers. As Caitlin states in her introduction, they are technologies that legitimise and entrench the sexual objectification of women, reinforcing women's less than human status and the belief that women exist for men's sexual use. Sex dolls, robots, and woman hating begins with an overview of the technologies produced and not yet produced, but continually foreshadowed in this new branch of the sex industry. She discusses their effects on the erosion of consent as a backlash against women's rights and the way it confuses sex with masturbation. Drawing on Dworkin and McKinnon, Caitlin argues that these are not fantasy objects because they play a role in real behavioural acts that mimic rape and necrophilia using 3D pornography. Her next chapter discusses common justifications for these technologies in terms of relieving men's sexual deprivation, involving men's health and improving men's health. Her next, well, she of course tears that to shreds. Her next chapter draws on Jeffrey's understanding of technology as a tool for terrorist acts against women, describing examples of sexualized aggression and violence used against these objects treated as women. Chapter 4 elaborates detailed descriptions of their use in brothels, moving on in Chapter 5 to discuss their use in public and private life and how women are groomed and gaslit to accept these, quote, dead body objects, unquote, a term coined by Shirley McWilliam in Ireland, to be used by their husbands and partners, as well as promoted by the media and the sex doll industry. Chapters 6 and 7 detail the horrific recruitment of these technologies to serve the interests of paedophilic use and abuse. The conclusion gives us hope by documenting the spread of resistance globally and locally, with details of many of Collective Shout's successful campaigns against organisations such as Wish, Alibaba and Etsy. Caitlin concludes with a challenge to consider, quote, as a culture, we need to decide what we value and where our priorities truly lie. Do we endorse men's complete freedom to enact any and all of their porn-fueled sexual desires on compliant replica women? Or are we committed to upholding the human rights of women and girls? It cannot be both, she ends with. Caitlin lives in Western Australia and was educated in music. I was surprised to learn that, Caitlin. And then distinguished herself in the arts, studying sociology and anthropology. She has a long history in feminist activism. Caitlin has brought her life experiences as a mum for 3 kids to fuel her feminist activism with the organisation Collective Shout. 10 years ago, she joined forces with Melinda Tankard-Reist and a small number of other women to launch highly effective campaigns to resist the sexualisation of girls and women. After some years, Caitlin became their campaigns manager and continues to help the organisation succeed spectacularly. And it is inspiring to read their wins listed on the Collective Shout website. Other feminist grassroots campaigns that Caitlin has been committed to include Take Back the Night and Adopt Nordic WA, which advocates legislative changes to adopt the Nordic model of prostitution for Western Australia. I need a drink of water. Caitlin and I first met one-to-one online in a feminist Facebook group, and I see some members of it here, which is lovely to see, when she responded to a notice I had posted there offering interested women a copy of my notes taken at a webinar titled Sex Tech, Robots and AI, a Feminist Response. It was convened by Professor Kathleen Richardson at De Montfort University in Leicester, UK. It was held in the 4th of July 2020, and Caitlin, who was working on her PhD, a feminist analysis of sex dolls and robots, and working with Collective Shout, had been one of the speakers. Soon after, Kathleen Richardson invited me to join a group of women who were interested in developing a radical feminist analysis of sex robots under the auspices of the Campaign Against Sex Robots, or CASR, which she founded in 2015, quote, to warn against the dangers of normalizing relationships with machines and reinforcing female dehumanization. Kathleen has become internationally recognized as a feminist and academic leader of this abolitionist cause, and she recently renamed CASR the Campaign Against Porn Robots, CAPR, and I can share a website later with you if you wish. Caitlin and I then met face-to-face online when Kathleen brought the group together at a strategy meeting convened in July 2020 to read and critically analyse texts, including historically important ones by radical feminists, as well as other analyses, both critical and supportive of sex robots. You need to know your enemy. That reading group morphed into the FATES, the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics, and we've shared an exciting journey of intellectual discovery that has culminated 2 years later in an edited volume, which has already been announced, and which we hope will prove valuable for general consumption. As well as Caitlin and myself, other contributors to that book are Sheila Jeffries, Kathleen Lowry, an anthropologist at the University of Alberta, Canada, who was dismissed from her role as an undergraduate programs chair because of her gender critical views, Genevieve Gluck, a US-based writer, co-founder of Redux, creator of the podcast Women's Voices, and who is internationally recognized for her powerful gender critical analyses. In addition, there's Lydia Delisardo, an academic geographer from Spain, Shirley McWilliam, a lecturer in fine art at Ulster University Belfast, and Gail Beck in South Korea. We hope our book will be published by the end of this year, and we are very happy that Caitlin has beat us to the punch and got in there first, because it's a terrific book and it's very readable, although the contents can be hard to digest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's great, Vivian. And it is a difficult book to read, but as you say, it is so thorough, and yeah, you can't argue against it. It's very well argued. So now I'm just going to sort of half introduce Caitlin, because some of the things I was going to say was Vivian's already said. But I've known Caitlin now for maybe 5 years, I think. Not quite sure when we first met, but I think I certainly heard about Caitlin before meeting her. She's the campaign manager at Collective Shout for a world free of sexploitation. And the things that Collective Shout have done is extraordinary. They've shut down things. They've taken wicked vans off the roads. They've had all sorts of horrible things taken off the market, and they also do a lot of work in schools. Melinda and Daniel are speaking in schools to teenage girls and boys who get to learn a whole lot of things that otherwise they wouldn't hear. So the other thing about Caitlin is she was awarded the Julie Manville Memorial Prize when she did her graduate diploma in arts, which was sociology and anthropology at the University of Western Australia. She's also written a lot in the media. She's had work published in The Guardian, ABC, Huffington Post, Sydney Morning Herald, Arena Magazine, and she's been on The Project, Dateline, Flashpoint, Channel 7 News, Channel 9 News, and Triple J Hack. And I hope they all invite you back when they see this book, Caitlin. That would be fabulous. She also wrote a commentary chapter to Prostitution Narratives, Stories of Survival in the Sex Trade, where she wrote about the Nordic model. And on that, she's a member of Adopt Nordic WA, which advocates for the implementation of the Nordic model of prostitution legislation in Western Australia. She's been a speaker and organiser for Reclaim the Night in Perth, and as Vivian has just said, a co-founder of FATES, the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics. That's a great name. So Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating is her first book, but I do not expect it to be the last. Caitlin, your turn now.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming today. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I have been a fan of Spinifex Press, Australia's leading independent feminist publisher, for a decade. I would always attend these feminist events and I'd make my way over to the Spinifex table to buy their books. And as anyone who's been in my lounge room and seen my bookshelf can attest, there's a lot of pink. So having my first book published by Spinifex Press is a dream come true. Renata and Susan, I'm so grateful to you for believing in me and in this book. Thank you to the whole team, to Renata, Susan, Pauline, Rachel and Marilyn. And thank you, Vivian, for agreeing to launch the book today. I'm so glad you said yes. To my incredible colleagues and dear friends at Collective Shout, you are the very best and you keep me going. Thank you, MTR, Belinda L, Lynn, Renee and Daniel. Special thanks to MTR for reading early chapters and giving feedback, even as you were busily working on your own book. To the wonderful women at the FATES, or the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics. Yes, we love that name. To Kathleen, Shirley, Charlotta, Melissa, Lydia, Jo, and Vivian. You're all such brilliant feminist thinkers, and I've loved being able to read and discuss this topic and others with you and to learn from you all. So everyone look out for our upcoming book, coming soon, hopefully. To Caroline, Norma, and Emma Dalton, thank you for helping me to shape my ideas and for all your support. To Gail Dines, Sheila Jeffries, and Robert Jensen, thank you so much for your kind endorsements of the book. It meant so much to me to read them. To my friends and family, my kids who aren't allowed to read the book, and to Justin, your support and enthusiasm has been amazing. And just to everyone who has promoted the book or shared my work, thank you so much for helping to get the message out there. I really appreciate it so much. So I wrote Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating to expose the inherent misogyny in the global trade in female-bodied sex dolls and robots for men's sexual use, and as a warning of the real-world harms to women and girls, which I'll outline tonight. Sex dolls and robots represent the literal objectification of women. They are premised on our objectification and dehumanization. They are objects to be used in place of women, embodied representations of women designed purely for men's sexual gratification, manufactured for the express purpose of being sexually used. They function as pornified replica women that are always sexually available. The belief that women are objects or interchangeable with objects, or that we exist to be sexually used by men, harms all women. Despite this, advocates in academia, who are mostly men, big surprise, claim that the development of sex dolls and robots should be actively encouraged and that they could have many benefits, just not for women. Sex doll and robot advocates, both in and out of academia, failed to consider how these pornographic dolls and robots modeled on the bodies of women and girls might harm women and girls. They neglect to examine how female-bodied sex dolls and robots reinforce and further entrench attitudes of sexism, how they diminish women's humanity, or encourage men's sexual entitlement to women's bodies. They don't consider how sex dolls could function as a form of sexual harassment, as men impose their sexual fetish on women in both public and private, how women are being harmed by their partner's sex doll use, or violated by sex dolls made in their likeness without their consent. They fail to contemplate how replica women's sex dolls that are endlessly available for men's sexual use could contribute to rape culture or men's violence against women. they appear to be more concerned with men's orgasms than the very real harms to women and girls, which I document in the book. One of the things I explore is how the production and use of female-bodied sex dolls encourages and contributes to male violence against women. Sexual objectification is at the root of men's violence against women in all its forms. If women are seen as things, as objects, rather than fully human, then it becomes easy to justify our abuse and mistreatment. And we can't address an epidemic of male violence against women without challenging that routine, everyday, normalized sexual objectification of women. And sex dolls and robots made in the female form reinforce women's object status, this belief that women are less than human, that we exist for men's sexual gratification. So they're actually in direct opposition to efforts to fight men's violence against women. And they undermine our work to end male violence against women. I expose how men's access to female-bodied sex dolls and robots facilitates and encourages violence in a more direct way as well, with some doll owners using their dolls for violence. These men perform acts of sexualized violence, BDSM, and torture on their dolls, which they document through photos and videos shared to online forums. Men tied up their dolls. They used makeup to give the illusion of bruises after a beating and acted out scenarios of sexual slavery and predation on their dolls. Some said they used their dolls in preparation for sexual relations with women, practicing and fine-tuning their skills on the dolls. Defenders of sex dolls and robots claim that there's no harm in men's violence against a doll, that it's just a doll, so there's no victim, or even that they could function as a cathartic outlet for men and prevent their violence against women. But providing replica women for men to enact violence doesn't actually prevent violence. It is violence in and of itself. The violence isn't simulated, it's not a fantasy, it's real, and men are enacting this violence on a silicone body that looks and feels like a real woman. So they're having the experience of perpetrating violence against a woman, one that provides no emotional feedback. And this is reinforced by an orgasm and encouraged by other forum members. Having access to replica women to practice rape, violence, and abuse doesn't actually prevent men's violence against women. It's just an extension of it. Women and girls are also directly harmed by men's use of sex dolls. And I share the accounts of women whose male partners purchased a sex doll and their feelings of inadequacy and humiliation and distress as a result. These women felt that they couldn't keep up with their partner's relentless sexual demands and they just couldn't compete with a perfect, compliant pornographic doll. Many of these women felt powerless to object to their partner's sex doll. They described their heartbreak and devastation and feeling as though they were being cheated on, but also dismissed their legitimate objections because they felt they weren't allowed to feel that way. Some even prefaced their concerns by insisting that they weren't kink shaming and that they were really open-minded sexually. So this concept of kink shaming and the expectation that women should tolerate any and all of their partner's sexual desires, or else they're vanilla or prudish, that served to silence these women. And ultimately, the men's sexual preferences were rendered more important than the women's dignity or suffering. Sex dolls are also being made in the likeness of specific women without their knowledge or consent. Most sex doll manufacturers allow users to customize dolls to select the physical features of their dolls, like the body type, the skin tone, hair and eye color, and things like that. But some also make dolls modeled on actual women. One woman learned of a sex doll made in her likeness and given her name after the manufacturer posted a link to her Instagram account identifying her. Another learned about a sex doll made in her likeness after the man who created it sent her a message on Instagram, complete with photos, describing just how much he enjoyed using it. Doll manufacturers report receiving requests from male customers for dolls to be made in the likeness of women known to them, their mate's girlfriend, their next door neighbor, or a woman they have a crush on. And some men claim to have had sex dolls customized in the likeness of specific women. And the expression of misogyny here is really clear. It's about turning a woman into a sex doll against her will, the means to violate and humiliate and degrade a woman and assert his own dominance over her. I also devote 2 chapters to trade in child sex abuse dolls. And these are dolls modeled on the bodies of little girls, toddlers, and even infants, all marketed for men's sexual use. And I've witnessed some pretty awful things. I've seen child sex abuse dolls in the likeness of toddlers with dummies or pacifiers in their mouth. I've seen dolls that appear to be crying or distressed, dolls photographed in defensive poses, like with their hands kind of up protectively over their faces, childlike dolls that appear to be sleeping or unconscious to facilitate the embodied experience of raping and sexually abusing a sleeping child. I respond to claims from pedophile rights advocates that these replica children with penetrable orifices are sex toys like any other, or as they call them, fantasy sexual outlets. These men even claim that providing pedophiles with childlike dolls to enact their fantasies of child rape could prevent their abuse of children. But normalizing and legitimizing men's sexual use and abuse of girls doesn't prevent abuse, it just allows them to practice. Men who are found in possession of child sex abuse dolls are almost always in possession of child sex abuse material. I've been documenting this quite closely over the last year or so. So this is images and video of children being sexually abused that they have in their possession. So they're already sexually offending. And some even involve children known to them in their doll use by customizing dolls to look like specific children. There was a case earlier this year of a school teacher in Victoria who did this with images of his students. And there's also a service this is a service that a number of doll manufacturers are now offering, where they create a doll in the likeness of an actual child based on a photo. So the customer can send a photo of a child known to them and say, I want a doll that looks like this, and it will be created with penetrable orifices. I argue that child sex abuse dolls don't prevent sexual abuse. They just provide more ways, new ways for pedophiles to violate and sexually exploit children, even without having physical access to them. Now, after all that, I conclude the book with a bit of hope. My final chapter is about resistance, and it's about the women who are speaking out against this industry, their vital work and their victories. There's the campaign against porn robots, there's Collective Shout, the National Centre on Sexual Exploitation, or NCOSE, and the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics. So I've written about their activism, their campaigns to get child sex abuse dolls pulled from major online platforms like Amazon, Wish, Alibaba, Made in China, and the ongoing campaigns. So I wanted to expose the misogyny of this industry and how women and girls are already being harmed by it. But more than that, I hope to inspire readers to action. I want people to come away feeling more educated on the issue and just feeling equipped to speak out and to challenge the trade in sex dolls and robots, however that looks, whether it's lobbying government for new laws, calling on online platforms to stop selling the products, or even just challenging this narrative that sex dolls and robots are neutral or harmless or nobody else's business, or this idea they could prevent abuse. At Collective Shout, we're trying to get a global campaign for uniform laws against child sex abuse dolls going, and we would love your help and support to challenge the trade in sex dolls and robots. I'll leave it there, but again, thank you so much to everyone who has joined us today and for your wonderful support. It really means so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Caitlin. It is just an amazing book. I really can't say that enough. But we are able to have some discussion. If anyone has a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand, and you raise your hand by going down to the reactions section, and then you see that there's a hand raising option there. Hopefully you can. For some reason I can't see it tonight. So if anybody would like to say anything, or ask any questions, now is the moment, either by chat or by raising your hand. When you raise your hand, we'll be able to see it in the top left-hand corner, hopefully. Okay, nobody. I know, look, it's overwhelming. Renata.
Yes, well, if nobody else wants to ask a question, I have one for Caitlin. Caitlin, in your book, you describe very well how, for instance, in Australia, the import of child sex dolls is actually prohibited. But then you describe very well how the sex doll producers have already produced ways how to subvert this and still get them in. And maybe you can say a few words about that, because I thought that was incredible, really.
Sure. I think a lot of that is probably a bit more relevant to the US. In Australia, our laws are very good. And from what I read in the pedophile forums where I was conducting research for the book, they're mainly really frustrated with Australia. The pedophiles don't like the Australian laws because it does make it so hard for them. And they'll say things like, you know, this is not in Australia necessarily, but in the US, they'll say, you should really get your child sex abuse doll now, because you never know when your government might ban them. So there is very much an awareness of the laws and trying to subvert them. But yeah, I mean, I do talk about some of the extreme ways that these men will try and get around the laws. And some of this is, you know, altering the dolls to make them appear less childlike, or finding ways to hide them, or to get around customs, or even not having it come with penetrable orifices and watching a tutorial so you can do that at home, just to get around customs. So they're really very committed to finding ways to get their child sex abuse dolls, and to keep being able to do that even when there's laws in place. But I am quite confident with the laws that we have here in Australia. I think the only thing is how they're going to be policed. Because I know there was a case recently where a man was prosecuted for having a child sex abuse doll. And the question was, well, did he deliberately buy a childlike doll? Maybe he thought it was going to be bigger, even though he searched for, you know, small teen sex doll, like these are the search terms. The jury wasn't quite sure, so nothing really happened there. So it's really about how we police these things.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just thought it was really interesting, like the ones who put breasts on the dolls when they're being sent, and then when they have them, their instructions about how to take the breasts off so they look like a child. It's really devious, all this stuff, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, it is. So I know there have been a few comments in the chat, but I think that Caitlin just answered the question about the teacher in Victoria who made robots to the likeness of children. Was that the case you were talking about, Caitlin?
So the case I'm aware of, there was a teacher who he had child sex abuse dolls, but what he did is, well, he did a couple of things. He had child sexual abuse material videos, and he digitally imposed the faces of his students onto the performers in the pornographic videos. And he also made, using the school photos of the children, he printed out face masks and he put those on the dolls so he could incorporate different children, different students at his school into his use of child sex abuse dolls. So when the advocates say, you know, better a doll than a child or something, it's like, well, it doesn't even work like that. It's not either or, it's in conjunction with the abuse they're already perpetrating against children.
So was he actually prosecuted?
I believe, yes, he was prosecuted. I'm not sure the status there, if he's been charged or yeah, where things are at in the process. But yeah, he was definitely prosecuted.
Okay. Caitlin, do you know whether there are sex doll brothels in Australia? There is one in Spain, apparently, which opened in 2017, and there are some others elsewhere, I think.
Yeah, so I cover in chapter 4, I focus on sex dolls and the links between the sex trade, and part of that is looking at brothels around the world. And to my knowledge, there's not anything in Australia, again, to my knowledge, but there are quite a few that have popped up around the world. And what's interesting is it seems that many of these don't seem to last. There's these news articles and lots of discussion about these brothels, but then the websites don't exist anymore. The domain name is for sale, and the Facebook pages have been untouched for years. So I suspect that it's not actually incredibly profitable to run sex doll brothels, because it sounds like there's just huge turnover in the dolls, that the men treat them so roughly that they are damaged and broken, and it's not incredibly profitable. So that's my suspicion as to why they keep disappearing.
Okay. There are other comments in the chat thanking you for an informative and disturbing book launch.
Everyone probably wanted to go away and have some chocolate.
Actually, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was you say in the book, what do you say when you're at a party and somebody asks you what you're doing?
Yeah, that's fun.
Tell us about that.
No, basically how I sort of start the introduction is I guess just the being in that weird space where you're writing about sex robots and people want to make small talk. Oh, what do you do? And you're like, am I prepared to have this conversation? So, things that will come up on the school run or at weddings or at parties or with acquaintances. And you kind of judge a situation like, should I say this, or should I just say, I work for a non-profit? So just kind of judging the situation and whether people can handle it or how I think they're going to respond. And do I want to sort of, be at a sort of laid back social event and throw out the whole sex robot bomb?
Rachel, you have a question for Kate.
I do have a question. I'm looking forward to my book arriving. Caitlin, you must have seen some really disturbing things. And my question is more personally, how have you handled it? How have you coped? Because you can't unsee a lot of things that you do. How do you self-care?
I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of chocolate involved. I think for me, as I've been researching for the book and writing the book, there's a lot of anger. Like I find things that leave me enraged, and especially even some of the academic justifications for these products, or just kind of the claim that they're neutral and harmless, and that women who object are just kind of moralizing or policing sexual practices and things like that. So there have been a lot of things that make me angry, and I've channeled that rage into writing. I've been like, I've just got to respond to this. So it's actually been helpful to be able to write and to get it out in that way. But a big thing for me, and this has always been the case, just even with my work with Collective Shout, and looking at some of the worst things humanity has to offer, and really dark things, and Pornhub and sexual exploitation of children. It's been so important to me to have my colleagues at Collective Shout to debrief with, having that safe space where I can debrief, I can feel completely supported, and we can share, and we kind of get it because we know what it's like to be exposed to these things. And yeah, I guess just I work with the most brilliant women there are, so having those women, having those people, and just being able to support each other, that's really what has gotten me through this work and through writing this book. It's the strength from the other women that I'm fighting alongside.
There's a question here from Robin, but Robin, I can't see all of your question. So maybe you can ask it in person, about working in digital media and games technologies. Robin, are you there? Can you ask it? Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi. Sorry, yeah, that was like really long. Yeah, I was just curious, like I'm kind of coming towards the end of my PhD. Like I really love digital media and like technologies. I think like they can do like a lot of really great things. But I'm so frustrated with like the games industry and whatnot when you see platforms like Steam, kind of like similar to sex dolls. They'll have games that kind of feature childlike NPC characters and stuff. And within academia, there doesn't seem to be much pushback from this. So kind of when you were saying, like, especially a lot of male academics kind of support this kind of thing. I guess my question is, like, as a kind of early career researcher, like, kind of, do you have any advice for getting involved with other women to kind of look in and kind of team together to kind of challenge this dominant narrative? Like,
yeah, I think you make a really good point just about, well, first of all, I guess the male dominated nature of academia and the attitudes that go along with that. And I definitely saw that when it came to sex dolls and sex robots. And I was really quite staggered by what I was seeing. But I think for me, what has been helpful is being able to work alongside other feminist women in this space. So, for example, the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics, being able to come together with women. I think that there is a need for a feminist response to a lot of this technology because it's so limited in academia. There's just, it's really hard to get that perspective out there. And I guess, yeah, just so many male voices that don't see the issue with a lot of these things, that obviously aren't taking a feminist approach. So yeah, really, I mean, that's all I can kind of offer, is just to kind of find like-minded women and draw strength from them and work with them. It's tough. Yeah.
Academia is a hard place to be a radical feminist. Very hard. Oh, there's another new message. Vivian, Robin, to everyone, thank you. And there are some messages from Vivian about brothels that offer sex dolls and other things. So if you want to see those messages, you can scroll up and down the messages. Well, Renata, would you like to say some thank yous?
Well, before I say some thank yous, I think I just want to comment on academia. And unfortunately, it's not just the men who are like that. Very often, because women are generally not in safe positions. And so I have seen women supporting the men just because they think they have to support them. And if they support them, then they get brownie points. And that is, it's very, very difficult to deal with. But there are an increasing number of women who just say exactly the same. Oh, it's really good to have sex dolls. And in fact, there has been an article on the Australian site, The Conversation, that written by 3 women that actually talk about a Netflix movie or whatever it is, or documentary, that actually where women have built a pleasure room. And the pleasure room is full of kink, full of BDSM, and they say that's fantastic. That's basically, the response that women never get to say what we actually like. So in other words, if you want to be with it, and if you want to get pats on the back from your male colleagues, you have to say that you are sex positive and that you like kink and BDSM and a bit of joking, maybe. And I think that's very, very difficult to deal with, because when you then speak out, not just against the men, but against the women as well, that can be very difficult and leads to you being ostracized in the department. But obviously we have to do it. And the other comment I'd like to make, Caitlin, I really share your comment about anger and chocolate. But anger, I think anger can be extremely positive. And I think of women like Sheila Jeffries, who, and have spent their life writing about really unspeakable things that she describes, and like her new book, Penile Imperialism, which we will launch on the 13th of September, does that in great detail. And I think, I can't speak for Sheila, but I'm pretty sure that she too would say that anger has actually really helped her to keep going. It certainly has helped me keep going. My anger against anything to do with reproductive technology, and especially surrogacy, and the arrogance that these people have. And exactly the same thing, like, oh, it's a good thing, we have to support it because, whatever. So I think that's good that you've been able to use your anger productively. So anybody else has any comments or should we move to the last phase?
Nikki is making a comment about dildo use, but the sexual objectification context and politics are different. But I can't read the rest. I can only see a certain amount of writing on these chats for some reason. Doesn't want to move down. Hang on. Well, that it's promoted by the same sex industry and the same overall values. Yeah, that's quite true. Okay, all right. Thank you, Nikki, for that. What recourse do women and girls have if dolls have been made in their likeness? Oh, yeah. Can they get the police to charge them for that?
That's actually a really good question, and I'm not 100% sure on the answer, but so far from what I've read, not as much recourse as you might think. You think that'd be a pretty clear case of you could go and sue someone, but it seems as though it's quite a bit more complicated than that. So, I mean, there are a lot of companies that are doing this where they will say, okay, just to be safe, we won't do an exact copy of this woman. We might all just change the eye color or something. We'll make it 95% this woman, and then they can't sort of say anything because it's not actually them. Or they'll even, when it comes to like licensed characters, for example, they know they can't get away with that. So they'll change it slightly, or maybe they'll change the spelling of the name. They find these sneaky ways to kind of get around it. But question, I think it's something that's going to be more relevant, you know, as time goes on and the technology continues to advance, because it's going to be a bigger issue, and especially as the robotic dolls are more of an option, and sort of the deep fake options for voice as well. There's going to be a lot of complicating factors here that make things worse for women. So it's going to have to be something that comes up, and there's going to need to be new laws about this.
Thank you. Okay, Renata.
Okay, now no book ever gets done without a team of people, and we have a brilliant team at Spinifex. We have Marilyn as the office manager, we have Sharon as the warehouse manager, then we have Danielle, who's soon going to be the new Marilyn because she's taking over from Marilyn as the office manager by the end of the year, and she's already now a very, very good trainee manager. So thank you, Danielle. Then we have, of course, Pauline, our senior editor. And I have to say, Pauline found it very, very hard to work on this book. And I remember one point she said to me, I'm going to read it backwards. I'm just going to read it backwards. I just cannot read it one more time. I'm going to read it backwards. And it is a hard book to read, but I don't want to put people off from buying it. It's an incredibly important book. It's, I think, one of the new issues that have come up more recently, and you really need to know what these people are up against. It's just another full affront against women. Then, of course, last but not least is Rachel, our wonderful marketing manager, with her very able assistant Dashi that I haven't actually seen today. So, and normally I would also call and thank Caitlin Roper, who does the Spinifex Press socials. But I can still say that because I did ask you to put something up on your own book. So in the interest of disclosure and disclosing that Caitlin Roper is also doing the social media for Spinifex. And thank you very much, Caitlin, for doing a brilliant job. So you got so many careers, but I really think you should ask writer to it, because the book is written so very clearly, and I would find it so very hard to really speak up against it, because you have got the arguments really, really thought out and written down in very accessible form. So it's a brilliant book. So thank you very much. And thank you everybody who has worked on this book and will work on this book, like Rachel with the promotion. And thankfully we don't have to read it from the back anymore because it's not done.
Can I say that Dashi has now made an appearance on Rachel's
Oh, good.
app?
Okay.
And
So
also,
those-
just to mention the cover and the internals.
the cover and the internals, thank you very much. Yes, the cover has been done by Deb Snipson, and it's a fantastic cover. Caitlin sent her a few images, and the first covers that you came up with were almost too brutal, even for us hardened women. We said, oh, no, we can't actually do that. It's like women hanging from meat hooks. So we thought, no, we can't do that. But this cover is actually quite beautiful in its own right. And just looking at the women's expression, I mean, the dolls, shouldn't say women, the dolls' expressions on the cover, it's really sad. There's a lot of sadness. Whoever came up with these dolls, somehow or other, must have had a lot of reluctance about this. It's quite subversive, actually. And then the internals, our books are set by Helen Christie, and she too is a mistress of her trade, really. And when we sent it to her, she always does a sample of which fonts to use, and we said it's really tough book, so it needs to be easy to read. So as you will see, the book has good margins and is easy to read, quite big font, so that at least you don't have to eat more chocolate until you can read the next line, because it's actually clear, very clear and accessible to read. So yes, they are also part of the Spinifex team. We're very grateful to work with such beautiful, wonderful professionals who always go the extra mile. When at 11 o'clock at night we find out that there's a typo somewhere, they go and fix it. It's fantastic. And of course, I also have to thank Susan, who does, of course, a lot of the invisible things like metadata. Now, our dog Nala and I, we always have to suffer a bit when it's a metadata day, because she's not a happy girl when she does that. But metadata has to be done, especially for our distributors overseas in the UK and in America. And just having battled with a website myself today, it just drives you absolutely bananas. But at least it's not sex dolls. So that's better. That's good. I will try and say that to myself tomorrow when I curse what I have to do.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of this launch. And it's been a real pleasure. It's been a pleasure to listen to you, Caitlin. It's been a pleasure to listen to your launch, Vivian. And also thank you to all of the people who have sent in questions and contributed to the conversation. And if you know anybody who wasn't able to come this evening, it will be up on the Spinifex YouTube site fairly soon. And if you want to order a copy of the book, Rachel is now going to upload the share screen on how to order. So if you are in Australia, the easiest way to order it is to go to the Spinifex website, www.spinifexpress.com.au. If you're in America, then through IPG, our distributor, www.ipg.com, as well as the usual online monsters, the big online retailers who we don't need to name. And in UK and Europe, Gazelle, www.gazellebookservices.co.uk. The books might not be quite there yet, but they should be. So there could be a delay of a week or so, but it's basically a simultaneous release all around the world. So thank you. And thank you for everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
And I just want to add, for those of you who will be in the UK in October, both Caitlin and Melinda Tankard-Rees will be presenting at Filia, and it'll be a session on actually collective shout. And Caitlin will be talking about the sex doll book, and Melinda will be talking about her porn book, the accounts by 25 women about their experiences with men who use porn. So this will be a very dynamite session, no doubt. And so if you don't know about Philia, maybe Google it, F-I-L-I-A. It's a great conference. It's in Cardiff this year from the 22nd to the 24th of October. And it's over 1,000 women. I think they said 1,500 this year, so mostly radical feminists. So it's fantastic.
And it's Philia, filia.org.uk. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And it's been lovely to see you and hear you.